I want to welcome you all who have managed to log in and to register and actually be available to attend the webinar. This webinar really looks at a reflection on population registration, ethics and human rights, and is really a collective effort trying to bridge that disciplinary boundaries and to bring experts together from various fields looking at the law, public policy, demography, and also public health. And we hope by this webinar it will be a start to foster a greater collaboration and dialogue for us to be able to better understand and address the ethical and human rights challenges posed by digitized population data systems. Throughout the webinar, you'll see that we'll hear from experts who will shed light on how law, history, and policy have influenced birth registration in South Africa, Brazil, and Uganda as well. They will also look at how the digitized voter registration systems in Cameroon have fostered inclusivity and exclusion. And we hope that we'll also get a deep dive into exploring the various accessibility of population registrar systems for different vulnerable subpopulations. So this event is not only a showcase of individual research projects, and we'll be hearing a little bit soon on the overview of some of the issues that are going to be had right now, but the event also highlights the collaborative group projects undertaken under the IUSSP initiative. In terms of our agenda today, we will start with our welcoming remarks, which we have done right now, and then we'll go into a brief overview of the project, and then thereafter we shall have the fellow researchers and project presentations. There'll be three researchers that will be presenting their projects: Elizabeth Nansubuga, Georges, and Jenaina Costa. Right after that, we'll go a little bit into a Q&A and an open forum discussion. And at the end, we will have a spotlight on the ongoing work by the team and closing remarks by Montesa Kamal. So we hope that you'll stay with us right up till the end. And we are hoping to have a very meaningful discussion today. During the webinar, at the point where we have the Q&A, I greatly suggest that we use the Q&A icon that is found right at the end to be able to post questions or to vote for a question you would like. And the other thing that you should take note of is that we have simultaneous interpretation, and the presentations will be in English by all the presenters. However, we'll have the option for you to actually listen in. And at this juncture, just allow me to welcome Paul to say something about the 30th International Population Conference in Brisbane, and then we shall continue. Yes, Paul.
Hello. I just wanted to invite you all the attendees, to consider submitting a paper or participating in the conference, in IUSSP's flagship conference, which will take place in Brisbane, Australia in July 2025.
Thank you very much, Paul. And in case you need information on how to attend or what arrangements you need to make in order to attend, please feel free to reach out and we'll be here to answer your questions. And before we move for the presentations from the three IUSSP fellows, I would like to invite Dr. Ramesh Silva, the chairperson of the IUSSP Scientific Panel on Population Registers, Ethics and Human Rights. Dr. Ramesh will be giving us a brief overview of this collaborative and interdisciplinary initiative, and he will be able to kickstart our conversation. Yes, Dr. Ramesh.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be with everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Elizabeth already said it, but it really warrants saying one more time. This is the IUSSP Population Ethics and Human Rights Initiative is a really collaborative initiative. Here on this opening slide, you can see the diverse institutions which really are part of this initiative alongside of the IUSSP. This is a deliberately interdisciplinary initiative, engaging academic institutes like WISER, the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Southern California's Institute on Inequalities in Global Health, but also engaging civil society groups like like ISER in Uganda, and we're also extremely grateful to the continued support and guidance of the International Development Research Center in Canada. And in addition to being the chair of the IUSSP panel, I'm also the technical lead at the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems at UNFPA headquarters. And on behalf of UNFPA, we're just thrilled to be part of today's webinar and to be associated with this important work. So what is the initiative doing? It's really motivated by these key questions. Are digitized population register systems advancing inclusive societies, social protection systems, and public health infrastructures, or are they institutionalizing systematic exclusion and increasing inequality? The overarching objective of this initiative is really to infuse a set of interdisciplinary perspectives, drawing on law, history, economics, public policy, IT for development, demography, public health, to address a range of ethical and human rights challenges that are emerging as more and more countries modernize and digitize these kinds of population registers. What we're trying to do here is really bring this work forward because the pace of adoption in terms of digitization of population registers is fast, and the work on research, ethics, particularly around human rights, takes time, and so we're trying to accelerate this kind of work and bring more focus to it. We've already mentioned that the specific aims of this initiative are really to strengthen interdisciplinary research, scholarship, and practice. So here what we're trying to do is not just focus on research, but bridge the research and practice divide around ethics and human rights issues on the modernization of population registers. One of the things that this initiative really is proud of and is deliberate about is trying to support the next generation of interdisciplinary researchers and practitioners and bring them and support them to come into the forefront of these kinds of dialogues and research fora to inform how these kinds of systems are rolled out. We've already recognized our institutional partners, but let me also draw attention and acknowledge the fantastic IUSSP scientific panel on population registers, ethics, and human rights. And the members here are listed on the on the right-hand side, and I hope Paul will post the link to the panel's website on the IUSSP page. And we're very ably supported by our council liaison, Laura Wong, and of course the IUSSP Secretariat, Paul and Mary Ellen. The other thing I'd love to really draw people's attention to today is today we're releasing a new working paper, a new IUSSP working paper. On the left-hand side, you can see the title is Rights and Ethics in Biometric Population Registration, Mapping the Limits of Digital Recognition and the Drivers of Exclusion. And I want to acknowledge, Keith Breckenridge, Sophia Gruskin, and Jonathan Claren, who co-authored this work, and again, I think Paul is sharing the link to the paper in the chat window. But what the paper is doing is it's acknowledging that over the years, population scientists, demographers have studied the role of population registers, particularly in historical settings, and also in recent decades in more contemporary settings. The work of Simon Schrader and Keith Breckenridge stands out in particular, but also a long history of work on different types of population registers in Europe and Asia. But also there's been very humbling work which should give us much pause by demographers throughout the latter part of the 20th century, particularly the work of Bill Seltzer and Margot Anderson, who highlighted the misuse of population data systems, including population register-based systems, that have actually fueled and facilitated mass human rights abuses. So one of the key challenges which this initiative really seeks to address is to try to bring scholarship and dialogue to this balancing act, balancing the promise of inclusiveness through digitized population data and population registration systems against the potential risks, the risks of misuse of these register systems, but also their misuse in terms of facilitating systemic exclusion and discrimination against vulnerable subpopulations and the denial of their basic rights or the impediment to them accessing essential services. We're really, really pleased to use this forum to showcase some excellent work by our 3 IUSSP Population Ethics and Human Rights Fellows, Janina Costa, George Ayanga, and Elizabeth Nansubuga. We're going to hear from each of them in a few moments, but let me really, also highlight that, the IUSSP held a competitive open call for this fellowship program, and we got a very large response and a strong candidate pool. And so we're really, really pleased to have 3 excellent fellows with us who are not only supported by the IUSSP scientific panel on population registers, ethics, and human rights, but also a mentoring team which consists of additional colleagues from IIGH at the University of Southern California, Laura Ferguson, and Elizabeth Atori, and colleagues at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights in Uganda, and also Professor Jonathan Claren from the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research in Witwatersrand, South Africa. This initiative and this fellowship program really does build on some earlier work by the preceding IUSSP panel on population perspectives and demographic methods to strengthen CRVS systems. There we had the current fellowship program that we're doing is a resident fellowship program. The one that I'm showcasing on the screen right now was a non-resident program, and one of the major outputs of the previous panel and the previous non-resident fellowship program was a special journal issue of Genus, the Journal of Population Sciences, which showcased a wide array of technical research, which brought together both qualitative, quantitative data, and different forms of population investigation to really unpack issues around civil registration and legal identity, and how they play out in terms of our understanding of population dynamics, but also in terms of the inclusiveness of these kinds of systems, given that they are often mediators for people's ability to participate in society, in the health system, or accessing the right to vote, or accessing social benefit support systems. The current residential fellowship that we're highlighting today is a residential one. The first 6 months of the fellowship was completed in the first half of this year. It's involved a range of different program activities, very intense in-person mentoring, and a group research project in addition to the individual fellowship research projects that we'll hear about. As fellows were hosted in Johannesburg at the University of Witwatersrand. In the second half of this year, we've switched locations to Kampala, Uganda, and we're hosted by ISER in Kampala, and with similar activities, but with even more engagement, particularly with civil society groups and different organs of government in Uganda. So let me really, again, acknowledge the collaboration here with WISER, ISER, and IIGH, and also really thank the International Development Research Center for not only generous financial support, but really sage advice and guidance in terms of designing and implementing and rolling out this initiative, and hosting this fellowship program through an interdisciplinary set of activities. And of course, the IUSSP Secretariat, who do all the important work behind the scenes to make this happen. Let me close by just giving one other small plug. One of the co-hosts is the UNFPA Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems, which was founded back in 2015 at IDRC. And with UNFPA, we began hosting it in August of 2022. And I really want to highlight these priority focus areas of the center and bring your attention to the website of the center, which is linked below, and I think Paul will share it through the chat window, and highlight that there's a lot of work going on here, particularly in the area of CRVS and gender equality and women's empowerment, but also in terms of sharing research and technical guidance on CRVS and ID system strengthening. And so we're really, really thrilled to be part of this webinar and in collaboration with the IUSSP and other partners. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramesh. And also thank you so much for spotlighting the work of our next generation of scholars and practitioners. And it's really why we are here today. Just a reminder that Dr. Ramesh has been so kind as to include the link of the new IUSSP working paper on the chat. So feel free to be able to access it there. And right now we'll just go ahead to hear about the ongoing research from our 3 IUSSP fellow researchers. And allow me to remind everyone to post questions under the Q&A, just so that we can track better and be able to ensure that we answer all your questions and not utilize the chat window for questions. First up, we'll start with Dr. Elizabeth Nansubuga. Dr. Elizabeth Nansubuga is going to share with us insights on the exclusion of fatherless children from the registration systems, particularly looking at the national identity system in Uganda and highlighting the implications on ethics and human rights programming. You're very much welcome, Dr. Elizabeth Nansubuga, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Liz A. Good morning for those logging in from America, and good afternoon or good evening for those logging in from Europe and Africa. I am delighted to share a part of this work that I've been focusing on for the last 7 to 10 months. and I would like to present some of the key findings regarding exclusion of fatherless children from birth registration and national identity systems, looking at the implications on ethics and human rights. So during the presentation, we're going to know who is a fatherless child. Somebody would ask, there is no fatherless child, but this is a coined word about the fatherless children. A bit about Uganda. Uganda is a country in the east of Africa with a population size of 45 million. And on average, a Ugandan woman gives birth to 5 children. And now only 35% of births, are registered. Only 35% of births are registered for the children under 5 years. And of the 45 million, 17.2 million Ugandans do not have IDs or do not have a national ID number. So we are going to look at who are these 17.2 million Ugandans. And that's where we're going to find the fatherless children. So at the 17.2 is majorly composed of older persons and also children. And then you will find the children, for the category of the children, you have more categories that are excluded. You have orphans, street children, children living with disabilities, any child whose parents do not have documentation, because ideally for all these sets of children, you need to have parental documentation. If I went to get an ID now, I would not need my parents' ID. But somebody around the age of 16 and below, you need a document from a parent or from a guardian. And then the children born in war zones or border contested areas also have challenges getting IDs. But what is the importance of an ID as a demographer? One, an ID should give us the legal identity. But starting from birth registration, where children are denied the birth registration because of lack of parental documentation. And we are going to listen to some of the voices of these children. In demography, we look at the CRVS, the vital statistics. After data is collected from the administrative or from the population registers, and then of what importance, we need to look at reliability of data, the data quality and completeness of the vital statistics. But if you have 17.2 excluded, then that will affect government programming or access to social services, because the Act requires that a set of services are attached to the national ID. Still, in terms of data quality, you're going to find these sets of children going to the registration offices and saying their fathers are dead, but their fathers ideally are not dead. It is because to ease the system, to ease the process of registration, it is easier to say that my father is dead. I will easily be registered than if I say I do not know the whereabouts of my father, especially for children born to single mothers. There's an issue of assisted reproductive technology, children born due to IVF or sperm donors, children as a result of rape cases, single mothers who may no longer be in touch with the fathers. Those are the fatherless children. It widens social and economic inequalities because these children are excluded from the job market. You cannot get a government job if you do not have an ID. Then it has ethical issues and neglect of human rights. An ID or birth registration should be the first process to legal identity. There's denial of citizenship, where NIRA will tell a person through an SMS, you're under citizenship review. This young girl or boy has never moved out of Kampala, is purely Ugandan, but they are now being told they are under citizenship review. So these are some of the implications of exclusion of all these sets of children. So addressing this issue, I would use 2 frameworks. One is the SDGs, leaving no one behind, particularly SDG 16, looking at target 16.9, which is about legal identity, universal legal identity. So the 17.2 are left behind based on the systems or institutional barriers. Then we look at the child rights-based approach, and I'll pick out 3 issues of the 7 principles. One is dignity. This child deserves their inner dignity, their respect and care. They are a human being, they are an individual. Even when you want to attach them to the parent, but can we accord them their human dignity to act in the best interest of the child? If you require my parent's ID, I do not have the ID. Is that in the best interest of this child, this baby, or this 16-year-old, or children below 16 years? Then non-discrimination. Other children with parents are easily registered. A certain category of children are discriminated from the system. And this has implications, ethical and also human rights. And some of the findings are based on key informants, in-depth interviews, case studies, but also review of the legal frameworks in Uganda and South Africa. So one of the key findings is there's a parental gender bias. You find if you have your mother's ID, you're more likely to be excluded as compared to having your father's ID. And that's why children go to the local chairpersons and say, my father is dead. Even the local chairperson will say, if you don't have your father's ID, it is easier to say the father is dead. But then what information is the registration office getting if we are getting unreliable data? So while the law in Uganda is open and says I can provide any of the documents, my father or mother's ID, but you find in terms of implementation, I am better off if I have provided my father's ID versus the mother's ID. Yet, if you compare with a country like South Africa, if you do not register in the first month, the father has to appeal to be put on the birth certificate. So in South Africa, preference is accorded to the mothers, meaning that most birth certificates only have the mother's name. And in demography, we can prove more fertility and pregnancy based on the mothers. So you find issues of gender inequality in birth registration. So this brings about discrimination, but also humiliation and stigma of mothers. In South Africa, we found at some point they would say, let's check where you were vaccinated or immunized, because they knew people from Zimbabwe were vaccinated on the left and people born in South Africa, they would be vaccinated on the right. But imagine an officer telling you, like, first undress and we check which side of the arm you got vaccinated. So preference is given to availability of the father's ID as compared to the mother's ID. And even when you do not have both parents, preference is given to having paternal relatives versus maternal. And this is the same issue when it comes to citizenship. So lack of these documents, identity documents, is due to the discriminatory laws and practices. And the major practice in this, the fatherless children are finding, is because of the patriarchal laws that have had a long impact on individuals, women, and children, as earlier explained, that I am named based on my father's ethnicity. And so that is a patriarchy, even if the law changed to say I can provide any, but the officers will ask for that. So imagine children who have birth certificates and at 16 years, they're failing to get national IDs because they're under citizenship review. So they have to prove their citizenship because at 16 years, they are being asked for a copy of the father's ID or a paternal relative. Even when they have the mother's ID, they have to go through a lot of explanation. Then we have for the older persons, when we have the program, SAGE, program for social protection for the elderly, you find people who do not have IDs are excluded because government social protection programs are tagged to the IDs. NutriCash is a program still by government for pregnant mothers, still tagged to an ID. So if all these people are excluded, imagine a young girl who has no ID cannot benefit from a social protection program like NutriCash. But what is the reason? They do not have a father. So they are further excluded from the system. So to look at these laws, it is basically the patriarchy. It is basically the patriarchy of the legislation frameworks for Uganda and South Africa, where they are rooted in the apartheid or colonial laws, and that's where we find the patriarchy that will account for a high proportion. But I would like to note that Uganda has since made progress. We reviewed the laws. NIRA has had a legal review, and some of the amendments are waiting for the amended act. So there is progress, but this is still affecting implementation. So there is a gap between policy and practice. While the law does not ask for a father's ID, if I went to a NIRA office, I will be asked for this. And we need to note registration of birth or IDs involves several other people who may not be NIRA people, like the LC local chairperson, the different notifiers, the security officers are not NIRA persons. So the duty bearers exclude children with no copies of father's ID, which they are using as proof of ethnicity and nationality. But remember, in civil registration, please register me so that I become a legal identity in this country. So the request for children to bring along paternal relatives is not anywhere in the legal frameworks. Then I earlier explained the issue of inoculation. So looking at some of the voices from the field, a 20-year-old orphan who said, my 1 and 2 months old baby has no birth certificate because I have no national ID. So these two people are being excluded, the child and the mother. They were asked to bring, but they do not have all the people they were asked to get from IDs, so they gave up. Another person, my surname is a Chiganda name, that's the ethnicity, but my father was an Itesot. This is a unique one. He named me after my maternal grandmother. This family or this child, 4 of the siblings have been excluded because the NIRA officers are saying, you either change your name or we cannot give you an ID because you're saying on the form that your father is an Itesot, but you have a Chiganda name like Nansubuga. So the person says, I feel without an ID, I feel as if I'm not educated because every employer needs an ID. Now, this is the issue with NIRA of saying, because I've put my father's tribe and this is my tribe, but the name doesn't match. It's saying Nansubuga is an Itesot, but that is the reality that 4 siblings were named on the maternal side, but they cannot get an ID. So what are some of the key recommendations? As Uganda goes into the 2nd generation of IDs, which might exclude further people, we request for the review of legal and regulatory frameworks to address the emerging issues and ensure inclusive registration systems, but also to adopt a human rights and child-based approach to the population registration if Uganda is to leave no one behind. Lastly, as demographers, one of the issues of asking for paternal relatives is to create a family tree. And one of the officers from Uganda Bureau of Statistics said, we can track Michelle Obama's 5th generation, that they were whites. But because we are looking at tracking and creating family trees, as demographers, we can devise indirect demographic methods to link persons without causing further exclusion. Acknowledgement to all the funders and mentors and IDRC for supporting this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I must say your presentation got me shocked at the point where you were saying someone was denied an ID because they were named after their maternal grandmother. And that just highlights how law policy and system design can actually influence the inclusivity of the national ID system, particularly looking at Uganda. And I just encourage us all, I already see that some questions are coming in the Q&A platform, to be able to post your questions if you have any, and we shall be getting back to you. Our second IUSSP Population and Ethics Human Rights Fellow is Dr. Georges Macaire. He will share insight on his work on electoral registration in Cameroon. Dr. Georges, you are very welcome. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to present to you a portion of the research I've been conducting for almost a year as part of the Population Register Human Rights and Ethics programs. My name is George Macaire Iyinger, and I'm from Cameroon. And I hold a PhD in sociology from the University of Paris-Nanterre in France. My work broadly focuses on technological landscape in Africa. And as you can see in the context of this presentation, I will be sharing with you some essential points that emerge from reflection on the use of voter register in Cameroon. Therefore, the voter register is considered here as a case study for broader thinking on population register. I would like to thank the organization funding this program, as well as the fellow researcher with whom we are working to advance knowledge on population register. Now, on this slide, you can observe that we are presenting some statistical data regarding Cameroon, a Central African country with a population approximately 27 million, an estimated growth rate of 2.6%, and a GDP of $45 billion, and a per capita GDP of $1. And one of the key points of this in this data concern the National Voter Register, which include approximately 6 million registered individuals. Next to it, we see the figure for the last presidential election held in 2018. And in this voter register, only 3.5 million people actually vote. So while these numbers are quite slow, they still provide insight into political participation in Cameroon and raise questions about the state and weakness of the register. It is important to understand that in 2012, Cameroon adopted biometric voter registration through a contract obtained with German companies known as Veridos, with the aim of creating a more secure and reliable voter register that will gain unanimous acceptance, be less contested, and more inclusive. Biometric registration solely involves the registration of voters and does not affect the rest of the electoral operation, which continue to be conducted manually. And in this context, we become interested in the actual production of this register and how the biometric technology used enable the achievement of goals related to the universal voter registration. Our objective here is to examine the concrete registration practices and how they address inclusion and non-discrimination. We also aim to explore the socio-technical conditions that make the exercise of the right to vote possible. This research has an ambition to generate general knowledge based on empirical data and to advocate the inclusion while contributing to critical theory on political participation. Specifically, the study focus on socio-technical conditions that make it possible to achieve the principle of leave no one behind. And it is an aspiration for emancipation and ideal toward which countries strive for greater justice. In our context and case studies, this principle translates to leave no voter behind. And with the adaptation of the general principle, we want to emphasize that the right to vote should also be considered a fundamental right and a crucial element at the foundation of democracy. I will say that we believe that the pursuit of such principle is shaped significantly by national and historical context. Even within the diversity of register, there are differences that need to be examined, highlighting the complexity of the issue. The first point we want to share is with you is that the digitization of the population register can sometimes work against the beneficiary. This observation is based on our finding when comparing voter registration practices before and after the introduction of biometric, with a focus on inclusion and discrimination. For example, before biometric, it was possible to register to vote without a national ID card. But after biometric, this is no longer possible. There are other examples that I don't have time to elaborate on here, but therefore we believe that the adoption of technology in the production of population register should pay attention to their ethical and inclusive dimension. Next slide, please, Paul. The second point concerns the fact that the life of biometric register is largely determined by a specific socio-technical condition that any scientific analysis must take into account. There is a scarcity of resources and inadequate infrastructure, inadequate registration infrastructure. For example, in my case study in Cameroon, there is a desire amongst registration agents to register as many people as possible, but there are constraints related to the lack of resources for transportation, material to set up registration site, and even communication resources. The scarcity of infrastructure and resources play a significant role in shaping the exercise of the right to vote and political participation. And this is why registration agents need to develop what I call agile practices that combine innovation, creativity, and inventiveness to continue registering voters. All of this is detailed in my research. Next slide, Paul, please. Next. Thank you so much. Another essential point is to consider that any research on population register must acknowledge that this register can be contested by the population that could benefit from them to a certain extent. Under certain conditions, sometimes during political crisis, population register can be contested, as is the case in Cameroon, where many young people refuse to register to vote. This political disinterest is linked to the political, economic, and infrastructural context, as young people believe that effort should be focused elsewhere. Unlike other registers where population demand registrations, the voter register is sometimes seen as unnecessary for a period. Therefore, those responsible for registering citizens are increasingly adopting a marketing approach to promote voter register and communicate their importance for change. Next slide, please. The final essential point concerns the specificity of population register in each country. It is important to understand that population register can be fragmented or unified depending on the country. Their nature determines the type of crisis that can occur during registration experiences. In Cameroon, where population registers are fragmented, the voter register rely on other population registers such as the civil registry, health register, and justice register. The chaotic nature of this register has significant implication for the voter register. While the unified nature of population register may signal the presence of a monopoly, the fragmented nature often creates opportunity for multiple market amongst capitalist enterprise. Regardless, this situation highlights the need to mobilize a socio-history of population register to understand them in their historical context. So thank you so much. That is the main point I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Georges, for really spotlighting some of the key findings in your research. And I must say, it's quite interesting. It nicely highlights how the digitization of population registry is actually shaping who participates in electoral processes in Cameroon. And we've also seen that with Elizabeth's research that also spotlights some of the effects of the digitization under the National Identification Registry in Uganda. Next, we are going to hear from our third, but not least, definitely, panelist, who is the fellow, Janaina Costa. She will be spotlighting how, particularly looking at the comparative perspective on the evolution of the modern birth registration in Brazil, South Africa, and also in Uganda. Janaina, you're very welcome.
So, hello, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Georges. And thank you, everyone, to be here with us. So, good evening. I'm in Japan now. And I'm going to talk, as Elizabeth said, I'm going to speak a little bit of my research today for you. And but before, I'd like to present myself. My name is Janaina Costa. I hold a Master in Social and Economic Development by the Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. I also have a postgrad course in digital law, and my background is in law, and I'm a Brazilian. So with no further ado, let's talk more about the project. It's my project, just let me fix that. Okay, perfect. It's a comparative analysis of population registration systems in Brazil, South Africa, and Uganda, and I'm going to be looking to the ethical and human rights implications for birth registration incentives and policymaking. So why this is important? As you can see here, more than 1 billion people, they still don't have legal identity around the world. 1 in 4 children under the age of 5 do not officially exist. That's what it means. So without a form of identity, as my predecessor already highlighted, one is at the risk of being disengaged from the formal economy, government, benefits and programs, and other critical opportunities. So why a comparative analysis? Here you can see some facts about the countries that I'm going to be looking to, like Brazil, Uganda, and South Africa, and they all represent a very diverse socio-political context. And this, I think, allows for this very rich comparative analysis. We can have that how does implementing incentive policies for birth registration in these countries to address the birth registration gap among the population can provide us for interested overview of the study of these policies and their implications from an ethical and human rights perspective. But in any case, there are some elements of comparison, such as the size of the economy, the colonial history, language, and also this allows us for a better understanding of where these challenges are in the same field and where they separate. So here I would like to give you an overview of my research so far, so my research question and my sub-questions. So what I'm trying to respond, to try to better understand, is how the laws and policies evolved over the past 40 years in these countries and how they affect the birth registration. So in Brazil, South Africa, Uganda, and especially concerning fairness and human rights on these policies. So we will then try to look at the main changes that have taken place, analyze them on 2 fronts. The first front that I'm going to use is the 3 delays model to assess whether they address non-obstacles for civil registration. And on the second front, whether these policies and regulations seeking to encourage, to foment registration did it in a more inclusive way, or on the contrary, if they end up having negative consequences, including excluding parts of the population or hindering human rights, even if not in purpose, if not by design, as we say. So I was just stating that the research, we're going to assess the regulatory landscape on these 3 different countries as part of a larger comparative study. So the sections where we're going to assess the effectiveness, but also the fairness and the equity embedded in this kind of policies, and looking to that through the lenses of ethic and rights grounded on human rights grounded lenses. Next, please. So here I'm going to just speak very briefly on the 3 delays models that you already heard. It's like my framework to analyze these policies. It was originally developed to categorize the main factors that contribute to delay in seeking obstetric care and preventing maternal and child mortality. And as you can see in this article called Too Far to Walk, Maternal Mortality in Context by Thaddeus and Main, the authors, they examine the factors that, 1, delay the decision to seek care, 2, the delay reaching our health facility, and 3rd and finally, delay in receive adequate health care. So Benona and al. Have shown that this 3 delay models framework can be also effectively be used and repurposed to identify barriers to birth registration. For instance, what you can seek in deciding, the delay in deciding to register can be due to socioeconomic and cultural factors, such as lack of awareness or cultural beliefs, but also a calculation of the opportunity costs of seeking birth registration. Secondly, the delay in reaching the registration authorities, also similarly to the original use of the framework, can be due to accessibility barriers such as distance and lack of transportation options to reach these offices. And finally, the delay in submitting the application, receiving the document, so the birth certificate, can also be due to red tape constraints, we'll say that, complex procedures, or staff shortage and delivering the services. So by considering these 3 phases of delays, the policymakers and practitioners can identify the key obstacles to birth registration and better design interventions to effectively mitigate these barriers. Next, please, Paul, thank you so far. So I'm going to talk a little bit the question, the work so far, and it's more about questions. So it's a question of incentives and a question of barriers. And you can put the next slide, Paul. But what I would like to state this, I'm halfway through my research. So it's 6 months now. And right now, I really have much more questions than answers for you. And so bear with me. And I'm sure if you have any other questions that I would like you to share in this chat too, as you can have this fruitful interchange with you. So next slide, please. The first question that struck me in my research is like, it's about, it is like what this barrier, is it a question of opportunity cost? We already see that was the present on the first phase of delay, right? Here I have some quotes of the interviews that I did with people from the community in Uganda and also from registration officers in Uganda. That was the most recent interviews that I took, and I wanted to share with you these very fresh points of view that I just collected. So here we have like, what is the point? One of the interviews, one of the mothers that I interviewed stated to me, what is the point of having a birth certificate if the child is not going to the school? There's a better ways to expand the 10,000 Ugandan shillings. This is more or less about $3. I'm sorry, I didn't complete the slide, but it's about $3 until they ask for them when the child passes the PLE. So this PLE, it's the exam leaving the primary school. So they only ask for the birth certificate when the child achieves, has to take this exam. It's when they are around 11, 12 years old. And also one of the Nida Kayunga district office stated to me that there is a sub-county located 80 kilometers from Kayunga. And this distance, in his opinion, really impacts individuals' willingness to register, affecting overall registration numbers. So you can see there is opportunity costs here when we're talking about the fees that are charged. Also, it's important to attribute that this pricing can be, the fee is actually about 5,000 officially in law. But if you have to go to Kayungu Street or longer distance, you pay someone to do that for you. So it can go from 10 to even 20,000 Ugandan shillings, so meaning to $6 if you need to hire someone to do this process for you. And in my comparison analysis with, for example, with Brazil, since 1997, with the law from 1997, if I'm not mistaken, also known as the gratuity law, it amended the registrar law in Brazil to give and extend the right of free registration and free birth certificate to everyone. And in my research, like here, I don't have time to unfold all the data, but we can see, like, for sure, that this shift in the law and extending the gratuity had a great impact in boosting registration rates. So thus mitigating one of the barriers that we see here, for example, in Uganda. So, and the determination in Brazil for the gratuity of the registration and for the birth certificate, because important to state, the birth registration is free in Uganda, but not the birth certificate. So I'm going to state later on in my presentation, but many mothers and fathers leave the hospital facilities if they choose to give birth in a health facility without even the registration, without even the note of notification of the birth. So, one step back, the determination that I was talking about, the gratuity law, it was also accompanied by enforced mechanism, because as Elizabeth was really saying, sometimes you have a gap between the policy and the practice, right? What Brazil did, the enforced mechanisms of this gratuity law, such an example, obliged the registration office to post in a highly visible place that this birth certificate is free, allowing for easy reading and public access. Tables contain the updates and costs and fees of other kinds of registers, in addition to clear information about the gratuity of birth registration and certificate. So a lot of raise awareness campaigns, and to really spread the word on this change of the law, and make sure until this day, this law is from 97, right? Until today, if you go in the birth registration office, you're going to have a huge sign saying that the registration is for free and the birth certificate is free. So ensuring that the people know their rights and ask for the rights. Like I told you, for example, people paying 10,000 Ugandan shillings, if the fee is only 5,000, it can also be an issue of communication. Yes, next one, Paul, thank you. So later I'm asking myself, is it a question of policy design? Because we hear, I hear from an official that they are aiming to implement more severe penalties for late registration for trying to enhance the death and birth registration rates. For example, in Uganda, as I perceived it so far, they have good birth registration data. So far, it's improving, but it's still they're struggling, for example, with the death registration rates. And the mindset that, at least in my opinion, I perceive, is that they'll try to implement penalties for this late registration to try to cope with this problem. But what we see in Brazil, for example, when we did have fines for late registration, it had the reverse, the contrary opposite effect, because what parents do to try to avoid the fine was lying about the date of birth of the kids. So they say that they're younger than they actually were, so they don't pay the fines. And then this actually results in very bad and wrong data and so the quality of data, it's impoverished because of this kind of policies that actually try to better quality of data, but has the opposite of the intended of the policy. So here is also something that I'm trying to do in this comparison, say, okay, this has been done to Brazil and didn't work very well. So probably should rethink the methods that you want to incentivize people to register and timely register. Next one, please. Another question that I thought was like a question of gender. So here I have something that I thought was really curious. I was interviewing one parent and was a father of the kid, and he's stating to me that he has 3 kids. And the 2 older kids had the birth certificate and were timely registered. And actually, he went through a great deal to register the 2 first child. He, for one of them, he went like 4 times to the registration officer to get the birth certificate. And he did got the birth certificate for both of the older kids before they complete 2 months. And then I asked, and what about the 3rd child that's 2 years old? Oh no, it doesn't have. They doesn't have a birth certificate yet. Why I say they? Because this is the shift. It's if we say why not? Because it's a girl. And actually, what he was stating is that he wanted the incentive to timely register the kids was because they're the boys, and they hoped to enroll them in a football, in a soccer academy, and for enroll on that, and to progress in soccer as a profession. They really require a birth certificate. A national ID is not enough. They don't accept that because the national ID can be self-declaratory if you don't have a birth certificate. And this was not just one parent. A second parent told me the same, that he wanted to register timely his kids if they were boys because of that, because he himself is a football player and cannot advance in the career because the leagues are by age, right? Like under 18, under 21, and so on and so forth. And because he only has the national ID and not the birth certificate, he cannot progress as a professional. And he wished his children would not be ripped off of the same opportunity that he is struggling with right now. So when we see this kind of curious case, we see that when parents face tough choice allocating limited resources among the children, they are the girls that often end up overlooked. So you see that the parent did with the extra mile to register the boys for the football purpose, but also, for example, if you have more than one child, and you ask for a fee, usually they're going to pay for the fee for the boys first. They're going to pay for the education of the boys first. And something that you see over and over again, reinforcing the gender gaps. So also an unintended consequence that we have for this kind of policies when you force parents to choose how to allocate the sparse resource. Either it's time, because as I told you, for this parent, he has to go many, many times to register. So for this girl, he said, like, when I have the time, I will go maybe 9 months when I finish my harvest. That was exactly his words to me. So if you have to choose, how to allocate resource, you're gonna be 2 boys. So the question here that we started with the speech from Romesh is like, so how digitization is actually impact CV registration and vital statistics. So although something that I already learned that's very commendable is that NIDA has equipped units with registration systems and even internet access bundles, but many of the staff do not know how to operate the system. And meaning that the parents are often instructed to return to register when a doctor is available to operate the system, leaving only with a birth notification sometimes, or even not that, just with the immunization card, because there is no one available, or even because they don't have the access, or because they don't have the tech savvy to operate the system. So you have to acknowledge these two when you're thinking about technology, right? Because always has these two sides. It can help to solve problems in a given system, such as reducing distance, service time, processing costs, but it also can create new problems, such as surveillance threats, decreased privacy, and data security concerns. And then next one. So what I think now, actually the very, really important question is, ultimately, the question is, who is left behind and how can we include them? So because it's a question really about bridging the gaps and including the needs of those often marginalized of the systems. And that's why our research here from me, Josh, and Elizabeth are so important, how we can highlight these gaps, but also try to suggest recommendations and how we can bridge that. And next slide, please. So my research story, as I told you, is a middle point. So it's to be continued. And I'm going to keep looking other ways to better understand these issues, such as, for example, that we have in court claims in Uganda and in South Africa about block IDs, about exclusion of elderly persons from social grades because they don't have a national ID or birth certificate, and try to better understand these barriers, and if there is some violations of rights have been taking place in these 3 countries. So thank you very much, and over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Naina. And your presentation does highlight some of the questions that the population grapples with when they are interacting with the birth registration systems. And the answers to these do reflect some of the incentives or the disincentives for birth registration in the various countries. And you shed light on a comparative analysis between Uganda, South Africa, and also looking at Brazil. And right now, I just want to say thank you to all our fellows that have highlighted very specifically how we are able to show the importance of a population perspective and looking particularly at the interdisciplinary lens. We are now getting into a moment of questions and answers. I already see that some questions have been coming in. And the very first question was to you, Dr. Elizabeth. Fred Kasalire needs to seek more clarity on what constitutes a fatherless child according to the research that you're using, and can the documents of caregivers or guardians suffice? This question goes to you, Dr. Elizabeth, and you can unmute and answer. We'll go through a round of questions for all our panelists.
Thank you, Fred, for the question. Who are the fatherless children? These are children born due to IVF or sperm donors. The father is unknown, but you get a sperm from the facilities, health facilities. These are children born to single mothers. It could be as a result of rape. It could be as a result, my parents separated and I do not have documentation now, or I cannot get in touch with my father. You have cases of you've grown up with your mother and at 16 or 15, you're being asked, bring a document. And I've talked to girls who have said, how do I look for a person whom I've not seen for all these years just because I want their ID? You're basically not in touch and your mother has not given you any details. Or even if you know your father in the early childhood days, you can no longer track them. And your father may also not be willing to just give you an ID to use it for registration. So those are the kind of children born as a result of rape, incest, or they are these children, you're born to the famous politicians, priests, you're fatherless because you may not take the priest's ID for registration, or the priest may not give that ID. So that is a term of coining fatherless. Can the guardian's document suffice? Yes. But now you will find, but the guardian has to be on the paternal side. And some of these children may not know the guardians on the paternal side. If it's IVF, there are no relatives, there are no guardians. If it is incest, rape, you don't have the paternal side. And you might only have the mother's side. But they can suffice, though you will still get challenges, and most children give up in that process of the back and forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And we are a little bit running late on time, but I would want to ask just one question. And this goes to Janina. A question is asked Janina. Related to the Ugandan case, are there any strategies to increase the birth certificate coverage? And could you say something about government's commitment to increase that coverage? Just in a minute or two, and then for the rest of the questions, I'll be encouraging the panelists to answer within the chat, the Q&A chat. Yes, Janina, over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I also see that so the two questions that are actually relating to the comparison of the Brazil case. One saying about the lessons that we can draw. Also, I'm going to try to answer all of them that directed to me in one sentence. As you said, we're running late. So draw for the high registration rates in Brazil and South Africa and for Uganda. And it's also, there is another question say it is not possible to create a post so that the population can be registered on site in order to reduce the distance. So to answer, to make a mix of these questions in one answer, what I can say that there's a great lesson for the high registration rates in Brazil, for Uganda and for South Africa. It's really the shift on the mindset on this policy making that came a long way since the promulgation of our constitutions in 1988 that we call the Citizen Constitution, that unfold on this law, for example, the gratuity law that I mentioned in my presentation. That what is this shift? It's saying that and acknowledging that the birth certificate is a fundamental document to exercise citizenship and to be actually ultimately to be part of society, and therefore should be free, and we should spread the importance and raise awareness of this importance and make it accessible, as much accessible as it can be, as is a key for being part of society, relating with individuals and with the government. And how, for example, when you say it could be creating a pulse on the population. So I would say how, I think your question is like, how can you do this last mile? I think it's this kind of reaching overreaching policies. In Brazil, for example, we have something called the identification bus. That's actually a bus that brings a judge, brings a lawyer, and bring a registration officer with him, and goes in the small towns, very enclave towns, and once a week. So they advert that's going to be there next week or something like that, and they stay the whole day there to do this kind of service that overreaching these people that don't have access or are a little bit more further away from a registration office. So that's at the point we don't. I think there's it's a mindset, it's a shift saying that we should go to these people and we should make this accessible to them to register and to obtain the documents, and not making more barriers or actually doing penalties that if you don't come here in 3 months, we're gonna fine you. No, we come to you. It's the government that's bringing the service to you, because it's the role of the government to bring the service to you, because the government demands that to be part of society, right? To write school, to have to health services, and so on and so forth. So should be this key to access, being part of society, should be most accessible possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Janina, and also for giving that broad overview on other questions that we've asked. Right now, given the time constraints, I would just like us to be able to wrap up. But before we do that, let's hear from Professor Sophia and also Professor Jonathan about other ongoing efforts by the IUSSP panel on population registers, ethics, and human rights. And please, let's keep it brief, yes?
Ramesh has really already touched upon, to a great degree, the way in which we work, that it's collaboratively and fundamentally in an interdisciplinary manner. But the purpose of Sophia and I being here is also to speak about it a bit more broadly than the presentations that you would have heard, you have just heard in the webinar here. So in terms of the substance and the content, thanks, Paul, of this work, its content is not just the fellows and their research, although we did showcase that aspect today. We work in a broader educational space, teaching, training, resource materials, publications, etc. And these efforts really aim to reduce the risks were the ethical and the human rights issues not to be identified, as you have seen that our fellows have worked to identify them, and to address them through research and these kind of practical efforts. So this is part of the aim we're talking about in the project, to bridge research and practice. With that, I'll turn over to Professor Sophia Greska.
My great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, to be a part of this conversation. And I have to say, to be part of this wonderful group. So I'm supposed to share a bit about the current group project. And I wanted to start by saying something that it's been really clear that in all of the months of working together, and even more so now, frankly, than when we started, is that, and I think as you've all heard, all of us on this team are really invested in ensuring that as population registries become modernized and digitized, that they not only be as useful as possible, but they genuinely contribute to this promise of more inclusive societies. And I think we all see that for this to happen, they need to take ethical and human rights challenges into account. But that said, the more we get to know each other, the clearer it becomes that we have very different concerns and preoccupations about what we mean when we say this, even if we're using exactly the same words. So one of the things that, thank goodness, is clear is that it does seem that our very different disciplines offer not only very different, but very complementary insights into what it's going to take to get us there. So the group project is about sharing these different insights and then tying them together. So in the first instance, we're doing this with what we're calling a roundtable article, where each person in the group is being asked to respond in 250 words or less to the prompt, what are the key ethics and human rights issues to be addressed to create and deliver inclusive population registries that quote unquote leave no one behind. So the piece, following a format that's been used in other places, has a simple introduction followed by the brief responses of each person on the team. But the discussion section and putting the discussion section together is where it really comes together. And that will really be to highlight the commonalities and differences in our perspectives, but perhaps most importantly, and we're not there yet, help us to lead to a way forward. So it's a wonderful way to try to move the verbal conversations that we have each week onto paper. And once published, we hope to bring other people into the discussion with us. And hopefully this can help jumpstart some larger ideas that we have that we may want to do collectively to move forward. So with that, Elizabeth, let me turn it back over to you. And of course, we're here for any questions anyone might have.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And just to highlight, if indeed there are questions, our panelists are answering them directly in the Q&A window. But I want to say that, as you've already heard from a number of presenters today, this initiative is collaborative and interdisciplinary. Along with ISA, WISA, and IIGH, we are grateful completely for the strong support and also the careful guidance from this initiative has received from the IDRC in Canada. And allow me to warmly welcome Dr. Kamal, the Director of Global Health at IDRC, to provide some concluding reflections and to close us out on this webinar. Dr. Kamal, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I know I have just a couple of minutes, so I'm not going to take long, but I'll say a couple of things, which one of the first thing is to really thank all the fellows and everyone in all the partnership, this partnership that has made this tremendous effort to really bring this work to light. And for all the fellows, it's really incredibly useful and timely. My main remark, really closing remark, is for population fellows, scientists, ID practitioners, civil CRVS practitioners, is really their contribution is so important. It really is going to be helpful. Is going to contribute to what world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where gender, we're reinforcing gender gaps? Do we want to live in a world where children and mothers have to lie about the life of the father to get official documents? Is it a world where we want opportunities to be denied to people just because they are not registered or because they don't have the right name, the right ethnicity, even though they have been living in that location for many years of their lives, or maybe sometimes all their lives? So it really is a call or a hope that the population and the registration practice really goes from being an academic practice, from being kind of numbers, dealing only with numbers, to also deal with the values that are underlying these systems. And I know many people in these fields feel the same, but it's just really, this is a great example. This collaboration is a great example of what things could look like if those values of ethics, of human rights, of equity, of gender equality are all informing and are shown to be important for not only national development, but for global advancement and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll end here. I'm a little bit over time, but I really just want to give a tremendous thanks and applause to everyone that has been part of this collaboration. And we look forward to hearing more from you, and all the planned publications and webinars. We'll be looking forward to those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamal. And I would like to say a special thank you to our panelists today. Thank you for sharing those great insights. And for our participants, thank you also for being very good and active. A special thank you also goes to the IDRC Canada and the UNFP Center for Excellence for CRV Systems and the IUSSP Scientific Panel. Thank you so much. This wouldn't have been possible without your contribution and also wonderful insights. Please allow me at this point to end this webinar and thank everyone that has managed to connect and maintain participation. Good evening, morning, and day to all the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, our chair as well. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.